What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be having a look at the Scope Glint mechanic in Black Ops Cold War. Now, Scope Glint is something that was introduced to the Call of Duty franchise last year with Modern Warfare, and they decided to bring it back for Cold War. However, it does work quite a bit different than last year. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking it down and sharing with you guys exactly how the Scope Glint works in Cold War. And the first thing to know about it is it has a range limit. From 0 to 20 meters, Scope Glint won't appear. So if you're within 20 meters of a sniper, you won't see his glint at all. But as soon as you're 21 meters away, suddenly that Scope Glint will appear. Additionally, the lighting condition doesn't matter. I believe in the beta or the alpha, it actually mattered if you were facing the sun or if the sun was facing your enemy. And it seemed like the Scope Glint was really inconsistent. Now, at least in the full game, it is consistent. It doesn't matter if the enemy's inside and completely out of the sun, or in a cave, or in a building, or whatever it is. Scope Glint will be appearing no matter the lighting conditions. And personally, while of course it's not realistic to have it that way, I do think this is for the best. It keeps things nice and consistent, and consistency is good when it comes to gameplay design. Next up, another thing I found quite interesting about the Scope Glint in this game is it activates the moment you start aiming down sight. Not the moment you're fully aimed down sight and looking through your scope, but literally the moment you touch the button to initiate aiming down sight, that's when your Scope Glint will appear for enemy players. So that is something to be aware of if you're somebody that likes to do that sort of half aiming down sight thing, sort of preparing to potentially need to aim down sight. Just know that if you're doing this, your Scope Glint will be appearing to the enemy player. And getting into a bit more detail about when this Scope Glint is going to appear for an enemy player, let's first take a look back to Modern Warfare. In Modern Warfare, there was kind of a cone that would spread out with your Scope Glint. So if you're aiming a certain amount of degrees to the left or to the right of your target, no matter the distance, they would be seeing your Scope Glint. And this means in Modern Warfare, the farther you get away from your targets, the wider that cone is, and therefore the more likely enemies are to be seeing your Scope Glint. You don't have to be aiming right at them, you just have to be aiming sort of in their general direction and they'll see your Scope Glint. In Cold War, it's a completely different system. With this game, it appears there's essentially a bubble around your target, and this sort of bubble extends out about a body width or a body width and a half on either end of the target. And in order to see Scope Glint, an enemy has to be aiming within that bubble of you. Whether you're at 21 meters or 150 meters, it doesn't matter. They have to be aiming about a body width and a half away from you in order for that Scope Glint to appear. So you're not really going to be broadcasting that Scope Glint out to a huge portion of the map if you're standing back quite far. It's really only going to be showing up for the people that you're aiming essentially directly at. And this is very important information from the receiving end of this as well. If you see enemy Scope Glint, especially if they're at a long distance, this means they're aiming basically right at you. They are definitely targeting you. They're not aiming at your teammate that's 20 feet to your left or something. They are aiming pretty much directly at you. And I think that's one of the most important things to pick up from this video as far as how it would actually affect how you react to a situation. If you see Scope Glint, you really want to take cover. It's a much bigger threat than if you were to see Scope Glint in Modern Warfare. But finally, I wanted to test the different optics on the sniper rifles to see which ones have Scope Glint and which ones don't. Because, looking back to Modern Warfare, any sight that was above, I believe it was like a 4 times or 4.25 times zoom, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but any scope that had a higher magnification than that would give you Scope Glint, whereas any optic that gave you a lower magnification didn't give off any Scope Glint, and that was sort of the trade-off for having a high zoom optic versus a low zoom optic. In Cold War, at least currently, I do expect some of this to change at some point. The optic is literally irrelevant to the equation. If you're using a sniper rifle and aiming in the direction of an enemy player, they will see your Scope Glint as long as they're at least 20 meters away from you, no matter what. And yes, this even includes the iron sights, which is absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense at all to have Scope Glint with an iron sight because you don't have a scope, so there's no optic for light to be reflecting off of to create that Scope Glint. Which I do realize it is an arcade-style video game, it's not all about realism, and like I said earlier, the lighting condition you're in doesn't really matter anyway, so it's not like I expect it to be fully realistic. But I feel like one of the benefits of using an iron sight, since you are putting yourself at a disadvantage in a lot of situations without having an optic because you're not able to zoom in as far, one of the benefits should at least be that you don't have Scope Glint, so the enemies won't get as much of a heads up that you're aiming at them. So at the very least, this should definitely not be applying with the iron sights, even though it does currently. But honestly, I would also extend that out to some of the other low zoom optics, just like Modern Warfare did. I think that was a good way of handling it, where it managed trade-offs really nicely with the attachments. So you could go low zoom and then you wouldn't have Scope Glint, or you go high zoom and you do have Scope Glint. I think that trade-off just makes sense. But just know, in Cold War, the optic attachment is irrelevant. And with that, that pretty much covers it for Scope Glint in Black Ops Cold War. That's all of the different characteristics and little features that I've noticed with this mechanic. And yeah, as for my thoughts on this, part of me actually kind of likes, especially for regular like 6v6 multiplayer, I like the fact that you're not broadcasting a really wide cone of Scope Glint. So anybody at a distance is going to be able to pick out your Scope Glint really easily. Instead, it only really applies to the person you're aiming at that moment. Part of me likes that, at least for the 6v6 modes. I don't think I would like that in Warzone at all. I think it makes much more sense in Warzone to have more of that cone effect so you can see if an enemy is aiming just in your general direction. But for 6v6, I think it makes much more sense to have to be aiming directly at your target, or pretty much directly at your target. And then I have already shared my thoughts. I don't think the low zoom optics, especially the iron sight, should have Scope Glint, but the high zoom optics absolutely should. Of course, that is just my opinion though. I'd like to hear in the comment section below, what do you think about how they decided to handle Scope Glint this time around with Black Ops Cold War? Do you think the mechanic is balanced nicely as it is? Do you think iron sight should have Scope Glint? Just let me know all of those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.